The medical bay of Sunspire Academy had never been so crowded. Students from a dozen different species pressed against the observation window, their various eyes, stalks, and sensory organs all focused on the human lying on the examination table. Dr. Velis, a Korthan with silver scales and 4 delicate arms, moved her scanner over the human's body for the 5th time, her head crest flattening in confusion. The human's name was Jake Torres, and he should have been dead. 3 hours earlier, he had fallen from the upper observation deck during an astronomy practical. The deck stood 40 meters above the ground, and Jake had hit the courtyard stones with a sound that made every witness flinch. The Yavrin student who had accidentally bumped him had fainted immediately, convinced she had just killed the Academy's only human student. But Jake had not died. He had not even lost consciousness. By the time the emergency medical team arrived, he was already sitting up, rubbing his head and asking what all the fuss was about. His left arm bent at an angle that should not exist in nature, and his legs showed clear signs of multiple fractures, but he was conscious and talking. More than that, he seemed annoyed at the attention. "I keep telling you, Doc, I'm fine," Jake said from the examination table, his words slightly slurred. "Just give me some ice and I'll walk it off." Dr. Velis made a chittering sound of disbelief. "Walk it off? Young human, your femur is broken in 3 places. Your ulna has completely separated from your radius. You have at minimum 4 cracked ribs, and the impact should have ruptured several internal organs. You should not be conscious. You should not be alive." Jake shrugged with his good shoulder, then winced. "Yeah, well, humans are pretty tough, I guess. This isn't even the worst fall I've had. Back home, my brother dared me to climb the old water tower, and I fell off that when I was 12. Broke both arms that time." The crowd at the window erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. A Fennec student, all fur and large ears, turned to her companion. "Both arms? How did he survive?" "That's what they're trying to figure out," her friend replied, a gelatinous blorp who trembled with each word. "My roommate says humans have redundant systems for everything, like multiple backups for essential functions." Inside the examination room, Dr. Velis was conferring with the Academy's head of xenobiology, Professor Kenth. The professor was a Vortain, a species known for their analytical minds and their 3-lobed brains. He studied the scans with an intensity that made his eye membranes flicker rapidly. "The bone structure is already beginning to repair itself," Professor Kenth said, his voice a melodious hum. "Look here, and here, the calcium is redistributing. The cellular activity around the fracture sites is extraordinary. I've never seen such aggressive healing in a sentient species." "Aggressive is an understatement," Dr. Velis replied. "His white blood cell count is 3 times what I measured during his entrance physical. His metabolism has increased by 40%. It's as if his entire body has shifted into some kind of emergency repair mode." Jake heard them talking and called out, "Hey, are you guys almost done? I'm supposed to meet my study group in an hour, and we've got that quantum mechanics exam tomorrow." "You are not going anywhere," Dr. Velis said firmly. "You need to remain under observation for at least 48 hours. Your injuries are severe, regardless of how you feel." "Come on, Doc. I feel fine. A little sore, sure, but nothing I can't handle. You should see what football practice was like back on Earth. Coach Henderson made us do drills that would probably violate some kind of Geneva Convention if anyone found out." Professor Kenth approached the table, his sensory tendrils extended in curiosity. "Jake, help us understand. On your world, injuries like this are common? This is normal for humans?" Jake considered the question. "I mean, not common like it happens every day, but yeah, people survive stuff like this all the time. Humans are pretty hard to kill, honestly. We evolved on a planet that was actively trying to murder us at every opportunity, so we got good at not dying. Fast healing, redundant organs, high pain tolerance, the works. My anatomy professor back on Earth told us that humans are basically built like tanks compared to most species." "Tanks?" Dr. Velis queried. "Armored vehicles, heavily protected, hard to destroy. You know what I mean. The professor's tendrils quivered with excitement. Fascinating. I knew Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, but I had not fully appreciated what that meant for human evolution. Your entire species is designed for survival in the most hostile conditions. Pretty much, Jake agreed. I mean, we've got this thing called the mammalian diving reflex, where our heart rate drops when we're submerged in cold water, which helps us survive drowning. We can go weeks without food. We can heal from almost any injury that doesn't kill us immediately. We've got this crazy endurance that lets us chase prey until it literally dies of exhaustion. Oh, and we're one of the only species that can throw things accurately at high speeds. Humans are basically the universe's apex predators. A new voice joined the conversation. That seems like a rather arrogant assessment. The speaker was Zinthar, a Krillian student known for his academic excellence and his disdain for the newer species in the galactic community. His crystalline body refracted the light into rainbow patterns as he entered the medical bay, pushing through the crowd at the window. One lucky survival does not make your species special, human. It makes you lucky. Jake turned his head to look at Zinthar, careful not to move his injured arm. Lucky? Dude, I fell 40 meters and I'm lying here having a conversation. If you fell 40 meters, they'd be sweeping up the pieces with a broom. No offense. I would not fall 40 meters because I possess the intelligence not to position myself in such danger, Zinthar replied coldly. Superior species avoid injury through careful planning and advanced cognition. Right, because accidents never happen, Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Must be nice living in your perfect little world where nothing ever goes wrong. Professor Kent stepped between them, his diplomatic nature asserting itself. Gentlemen, this is not a competition. Zinthar, Jake's survival is not luck. It is biology. The human species has evolved remarkable resilience. That is simply a fact. Zinthar's crystalline structure flickered with colors that indicated displeasure. Then perhaps the humans should demonstrate this remarkable resilience more conclusively. Any species can survive one fall. Prove that your kind truly cannot be killed. That's enough, Dr. Velas interjected. This is a medical bay, not an arena. Jake needs rest and treatment, not challenges from jealous students. But Jake was already sitting up, ignoring the protest from the doctor. His broken arm hung uselessly at his side, and his face was pale with pain, but his eyes were fixed on Zinthar. You want proof? Fine. Doc, how long until you think I can walk? At least 6 weeks, possibly 8, and that's with aggressive treatment and bone knitters. I'll give you 3 days, Jake said, staring at Zinthar. 3 days, and I'll walk out of here. Hell, I'll run out of here. No bone knitters, no advanced tech, just human biology doing what it does best. The crowd at the window erupted in excited chatter. Professor Kent's tendrils waved in alarm. Jake, that's impossible. Even with your species' accelerated healing, the damage is too extensive. Want to bet on it? Jake asked, a slight smile crossing his face despite the obvious pain he was in. Dr. Velas was about to protest again when Professor Kent held up a tendril. Wait, this could be an excellent learning opportunity. If Jake is willing, we could document his healing process. It would provide invaluable data about human biology. You can't be serious, Dr. Velas said. The ethical implications alone. I'm not asking for experiments, Professor Kent interrupted. Just observation, monitoring. We provide standard care, pain management, and support, but we'd let his natural healing processes work without enhancement. Think of what we could learn. Jake nodded. I'm in, on one condition. When I walk out of here in 3 days, Zinthar admits that humans are tougher than he thought. Deal? Zinthar's colors shifted to something that might have been amusement or contempt. Very well, human, but when you fail, you will admit that your species' reputation is undeserved. Deal, Jake said, extending his good hand. Zinthar touched it briefly with one of his crystalline appendages, sealing the agreement. Dr. Velis looked between them and sighed. I don't like this, but if Jake consents and we're only observing, I suppose there's no harm. But Jake, if at any point your condition worsens, we're intervening immediately. Understood? Understood, Doc. The doctor moved to prepare a bed for Jake in the long-term observation ward, muttering under her breath about reckless humans and students with more pride than sense. Word spread through Sunspire Academy faster than light through a wormhole. By evening, every student knew about Jake's challenge. The betting pool started almost immediately, with students wagering credits, meal tokens, and favors on whether the human would succeed. The odds were heavily against him. Most species took months to heal from such injuries, and even the fastest healing known species, the Grath, needed at least 3 weeks for broken bones. Jake lay in his hospital bed, his arm and leg immobilized in basic splints. Dr. Velis had reluctantly agreed to forego the bone knitters, but she insisted on proper stabilization. The human had been given pain medication, though he claimed he barely needed it. His vital signs were stable, remarkably so given the trauma his body had endured. Professor Kent arrived the next morning with a full team of xenobiology students, all eager to observe the human's healing process. They set up monitoring equipment around Jake's bed, sensors that would track everything from bone density to cellular regeneration rates. The human bore it all with good humor, joking with the students and asking about their own species' healing capabilities. So you're telling me that if you break a bone, it stays broken forever? Jake asked a Yimmel student, whose species had exoskeletons. We must molt and regrow the damaged section, the student explained. It can take months, and we are completely vulnerable during that time. Many die if they cannot find a safe place to molt. Jake whistled, then winced at the movement. That's rough. Humans just need some time, and maybe a cast. Well, and milk. My mom always said milk helps bones grow strong, though I'm not sure if that's actually true or just something parents say. Milk? Professor Kent inquired, his attention immediately focused. The mammary secretion used to feed human young? Yeah, it's got calcium in it. Calcium helps bones. At least, that's the theory. The professor made rapid notes on his datapad. Fascinating. Your species continues to consume infant nutrition into adulthood? Most species lose the ability to process such substances after weaning. Humans are weird like that, Jake agreed. We're one of the only species that drinks milk from other animals too. Cows, goats, sometimes even camels or yaks, depending on where you live. It's pretty normal for us. The students exchanged glances. What kind of species continued to consume infant food? And from other creatures. The more they learned about humans, the stranger they seemed. By the end of the first day, the monitoring equipment had already recorded surprising data. Jake's bone density at the fracture sites had increased by 8%. His white blood cell count remained elevated, and thermal imaging showed increased blood flow to all injured areas. Most remarkably, the swelling had already begun to decrease, and the deep bruising that covered half his body was starting to fade. This is impossible, Dr. Velis said, studying the scans. These readings suggest healing rates that are exponentially faster than anything in the medical literature. His body is operating at an accelerated metabolic rate, but somehow without exhausting itself. It's not impossible, Professor Kent said quietly. It's human. We're simply observing something that's completely normal for them, but extraordinary to us. Zinthar visited that evening, his crystalline form refracting the soft lighting of the medical bay into dancing colors. He approached Jake's bed with an air of confidence. I see you're still immobilized, human. Only 2 days remain. Jake grinned despite the obvious discomfort of his injuries. Plenty of time. How's your betting pool going? I heard some students are getting creative with the odds. The odds remain in my favor, Zinthar replied. Most rational beings understand that your boast was exactly that. A boast. Nothing more. We'll see, Jake said. Hey, since you're here, want to know something cool about humans? We have this thing called adrenaline. It's a hormone that kicks in during emergencies. It can let us ignore pain, lift impossible weights, and keep fighting even with injuries that should be fatal. I read about this one lady on Earth who lifted a hover car off her kid when it fell on him. A whole car. Just picked it up like it was nothing. Anecdotal evidence proves nothing, Zinthar said dismissively. Maybe, but it's true. Humans have all these emergency systems that kick in when we need them. Adrenaline, endorphins, our immune system going into overdrive. We're built for survival, Zin. That's not a boast. That's just biology. Zinthar's colors shifted to a pattern that might have indicated thoughtfulness. If your species is so indestructible, why do you attend an academy? Why learn at all when you can simply endure? It was a good question, and Jake took a moment to consider it. Because being tough doesn't mean being smart. Humans survived on Earth, yeah, but we didn't start thriving until we started thinking, using tools, working together. We're not indestructible, we just heal fast and die hard. There's a difference. The Krillian student was silent for a moment, then turned to leave. 2 more days, human. We shall see if your biology lives up to your claims. After Zinthar left, Jake closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. The pain medication was wearing off, and the ache in his bones was becoming harder to ignore. But he'd meant what he said. Humans were tough. They had to be. Earth had been a brutal teacher, and humanity had learned its lessons well. The second day brought more visitors. Jake's study group arrived in the morning, carrying data pads and notes. They gathered around his bed, determined to help him prepare for the quantum mechanics exam he would miss. The human appreciated the gesture, though he found it hard to concentrate with his injuries. You should be resting, said Lyra, a phoenix whose large ears drooped with concern. The exam can wait. Nah, the exam is in 4 days, Jake replied. Even if I'm walking by tomorrow, I'll still need to study. Besides, talking helps keep my mind off the pain. They studied together for hours, with Jake's friends explaining concepts he'd missed while unconscious after the fall. The human's mind remained sharp, despite his physical condition, and he asked insightful questions that impressed even Professor Kent, who observed from a distance. The monitoring equipment continued to record remarkable data. By the end of the second day, Jake's bone density had increased by 18% at the fracture sites. The breaks were beginning to knit together, new bone forming at a rate that should have been impossible. His bruising had faded to yellow and green, the final stages of healing. Most impressively, he had regained some movement in his injured arm, though Dr. Velas insisted he keep it immobilized. The callus formation is unprecedented, the doctor said, reviewing the latest scans with Professor Kent. Normally, this stage takes weeks to reach. He's done it in just over 48 hours. His body is producing growth factors at concentrations I've never measured. Could we synthesize these factors? Professor Kent wondered. Use them to enhance healing in other species? Possibly, but we'd need to understand the mechanism first. Human healing isn't just fast, it's coordinated. Every system works together. The immune response, the metabolic changes, the cellular regeneration. It's like watching a perfectly orchestrated symphony, except the symphony is rebuilding broken bones at impossible speeds. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The pain was manageable, but the boredom was killing him. He'd watched every show on his datapad, studied until his eyes crossed, and chatted with the night shift medical staff until they begged him to rest. He lay in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the monitoring equipment, and thought about home. Earth, the death world, the planet that had forged humanity into what it was. People always focused on the dangers, the predators, and the disasters, and the diseases. But Earth was also beautiful. Sunrises that painted the sky in gold and crimson. Oceans that stretched to the horizon. Forests where the air smelled like life itself. Humans loved their deadly planet, maybe because it was deadly, maybe because surviving it felt like winning. The third day arrived with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety throughout the academy. Students began gathering outside the medical bay before dawn, waiting to see if Jake would make good on his promise. The betting pools had reached absurd proportions, with some students wagering entire semesters' worth of meal credits. Professor Kent arrived early to check the overnight scans, and what he found made his three-lobed brain work overtime processing the implications. Jake's bones had healed. Not completely, not perfectly, but healed enough. The fractures were knit together with new bone, denser and stronger than before. The soft tissue damage had resolved almost entirely. His bruising was gone. The swelling had disappeared. When Dr. Velas performed her morning examination, she could barely hide her astonishment. "How do you feel?" she asked, running her scanner over his arm for what must have been the 100th time. "Pretty good, actually," Jake replied honestly. "Still sore, but nothing I can't handle. The arm feels weird, kind of tingly, but I can move it." He demonstrated by carefully flexing his fingers, then his wrist, then slowly bending his elbow. The movement was stiff and obviously uncomfortable, but it was movement. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Velas said flatly. "I've been a physician for 30 years. I've treated hundreds of species. Nothing heals like this. Nothing." "Humans do," Jake said simply. "Doc, can I try standing?" The doctor wanted to refuse, but Professor Kent placed a gentle tendril on her shoulder. "Let's see what he can do. We're monitoring everything. If there's any danger, we'll intervene." Reluctantly, Dr. Velas nodded. Jake swung his legs over the side of the bed, taking a moment to steady himself. The movement sent aches through his body, but nothing he couldn't manage. He placed his feet on the floor, feeling the cool surface against his skin. Then, slowly, carefully, he stood. His legs trembled slightly with the effort. The bones in his left leg ached with a deep, persistent pain, but they held. He was standing. Jake took one step, then another. His gait was uneven and obviously pained, but he was walking. The crowd outside the observation window erupted in cheers and shocked exclamations. Students pressed against the glass, unable to believe what they were seeing. Inside the medical bay, Professor Kent was rapidly recording notes, his tendrils moving in excited patterns. "Remarkable," the professor breathed. "Jake, how much pain are you in? Be honest." "Maybe a 6 out of 10, Jake estimated. "It hurts, but it's not unbearable. Give me an hour or so to warm up, and I bet I could get it down to a 4. "A 6? Dr. Velas repeated incredulously. "Most species would be unconscious at a 6. Some would be dead." Jake shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Different pain tolerances, I guess. Humans have a lot of nerve endings, but we're also really good at ignoring them when we need to. Mind over matter and all that." He walked in a slow circle around the medical bay, his movements becoming slightly smoother with each step as his muscles remembered how to work. By his third lap, he was walking almost normally, though careful observers could see the slight hitch in his stride and the way he favored his right side. When Zinthar entered the medical bay, the room fell silent. The Krillian student's crystalline structure flickered with colors that were difficult to interpret. He approached Jake slowly, examining the human with what might have been grudging respect. "You did it," Zinthar said quietly. "I did not think it possible, but you did it." "Told you," Jake replied, unable to keep the smugness out of his voice. "Humans are tough to kill." "So it would seem." Zinthar was silent for a moment, his internal light patterns shifting and changing. "I owe you an apology, Jake Torres. I let my prejudice cloud my judgment. Your species' resilience is not luck or exaggeration. It is simply what you are." Jake extended his newly healed hand. "Apology accepted. And hey, I learned something too. Just because humans are tough doesn't mean we should be reckless. Falling 40 meters still sucks, even if I can heal from it." Zinthar touched Jake's hand with his crystalline appendage, and this time the gesture felt genuine. "Perhaps we can learn from each other. Your species has strengths that mine lacks. Mine has strengths that yours lacks. Is that not the point of Sunspire Academy? To learn from our differences? Yeah, Jake agreed, smiling. Yeah, that's exactly the point. Professor Kent stepped forward, his tendrils waving enthusiastically. Gentlemen, this has been an extraordinary learning experience for the entire Academy. Jake, your willing participation has provided us with invaluable data about human biology. With your permission, I'd like to publish our findings in the Journal of Xenobiological Studies. Sure, why not? Jake said. Maybe it'll help other humans who end up in alien hospitals. Speaking of which, Doc, am I cleared to leave? I've got a quantum mechanics exam tomorrow, and I really need to study. Dr. Velis looked like she wanted to protest, but the evidence was undeniable. Jake was healed, at least enough to function. His bones would continue to strengthen over the coming weeks, but he was no longer in danger. Fine, she said finally, but you're to return for daily checkups until I'm satisfied you're completely healed. And no more falling off observation decks. Deal, Jake agreed quickly, before she could change her mind. As news spread through the academy that Jake had successfully walked out of the medical bay after only 3 days, reactions varied wildly. Some species were awed by human resilience. Others were frightened by it. A few began researching Earth in earnest, trying to understand what kind of planet could produce such durable creatures. The answer they discovered was terrifying. Earth was a Class 12 death world, the highest classification. Its gravity was twice what most species considered comfortable. Its atmosphere was rich in oxygen, a highly corrosive gas that most species avoided. Its weather patterns included hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. Its oceans contained creatures that could swallow a shuttle whole. Its land teemed with predators that hunted in packs. Its microscopic life was aggressive and adaptable, constantly evolving new ways to infect and consume. And humans had thrived there. Not just survived, but thrived. They had spread across every continent, adapted to every climate, and conquered every challenge their planet threw at them. They had done it with nothing but their biology, their intelligence, and their refusal to give up. Jake returned to his dormitory to find it filled with well-wishers and curious students. His roommate, a glimmer named Tesh, whose species communicated through light patterns, flashed a welcome that was bright enough to hurt Jake's eyes. Easy, Tesh, Jake said, laughing and shielding his face. I just got out of the hospital. Let's not put me back in for flash blindness. Tesh's lights dimmed apologetically, then flashed a question. You okay? Really okay? Yeah, really okay. Sore, but okay. Humans heal fast, remember? His study group was there too, gathered around his desk with data pads and notes. Lyra's ears perked up when she saw him. Jake, you should be resting. I've been resting for 3 days, Jake protested. Now I need to study. That exam is tomorrow, and quantum mechanics waits for no one, not even Immortal Deathworlders. They laughed at that, and the tension in the room eased. Jake settled into his chair, grateful to be back in familiar surroundings. His body ached, and he knew he'd be taking pain medication before bed, but he was alive and functioning. That was enough. The quantum mechanics exam came and went. Jake scored well, despite having missed several days of class. His professors were impressed, though not surprised. Humans had a reputation for being stubborn, and that stubbornness apparently extended to academics as well as physical resilience. The story of his fall and recovery spread beyond Sunspire Academy, carried by students who messaged friends and family across the galaxy. Within a week, Jake had become something of a celebrity. Students from other academies reached out, asking questions about human biology. Medical facilities requested copies of his scans. Research institutions offered to pay him for tissue samples, though he politely declined. The attention was overwhelming and more than a little embarrassing. I just fell off a deck, he told Lyra one afternoon as they sat in the common area. It's not like I did anything special. You survived something that would have killed most of us, Lyra replied, her large ears twitching. "And you healed in 3 days. That's very special, Jake. You just don't realize it because for humans, it's normal." Maybe she was right. Jake had grown up with human resilience, so he'd never really thought about how remarkable it was. Every human he knew had stories about injuries and accidents and near-death experiences. His cousin had been bitten by a venomous snake and survived with nothing but a hospital visit and some anti-venom. His grandmother had beaten cancer 3 times. His uncle had walked away from a hover car crash that totaled the vehicle. Humans just kept going, kept surviving, kept healing. It was what they did. But now, surrounded by species who didn't heal like that, who couldn't bounce back from major injuries, Jake was starting to understand what made humans different. It wasn't that they were better. They were just adapted for a different kind of existence. Earth had taught them to endure, and endure they did. A month after the incident, Professor Kent invited Jake to give a guest lecture in his xenobiology class. The topic was human resilience and adaptation. Jake was nervous about speaking in front of a class, but the professor assured him that his personal experiences would be valuable to the students. The lecture hall was packed. Students from multiple disciplines had shown up, curious to hear from the human who couldn't be killed. Jake stood at the podium, his arm now completely healed, and looked out at the sea of alien faces, features, and forms. "So, Professor Kent asked me to talk about being human," Jake began awkwardly. "I'm not really an expert or anything. I'm just a guy who happened to survive falling off a building. But I guess that's kind of the point. For humans, surviving is what we do." He talked about Earth, about growing up on a planet where everything was trying to kill you in one way or another. He explained about redundant organs, about the human immune system that could adapt to new threats, about the healing processes that kicked in automatically whenever injury occurred. He talked about adrenaline and endorphins and the fight or flight response. He shared stories from his childhood, tales of broken bones and close calls and injuries that should have been fatal but weren't. The students listened with rapt attention. Some took notes, others simply stared, trying to process the idea of a species so durable. When Jake opened the floor for questions, hands and appendages and sensory organs shot up across the room. "Is it true that humans can survive without food for weeks?" asked a Yavrin student. "Yeah, actually. The human body can go about 3 weeks without food, though you'll be pretty miserable. We've got fat stores that the body can break down for energy. Water is more important. We can only go about 3 days without water." "What about radiation?" asked another student. "I heard humans can tolerate radiation levels that would be lethal to most species." "I don't know about lethal levels, but yeah, humans have some radiation resistance. It's not like we're immune or anything, but our cells are pretty good at repairing radiation damage. Some humans have even survived radiation exposure that should have killed them. There was this one scientist back in the 20th century who got exposed to a lethal dose and lived for another 30 years. How do humans deal with pain? This question came from Zinthar, who sat near the front of the lecture hall. Your ability to function while injured suggests either diminished pain sensation or exceptional pain tolerance. Jake considered the question carefully. We feel pain, definitely, but humans have a high pain tolerance compared to most species, and we're really good at pushing through it when we need to. Part of it is biological. We produce endorphins, which are natural painkillers. Part of it is mental. Humans are stubborn. We don't like to give up, even when things hurt. And part of it is cultural. On Earth, toughness is often valued, so humans learn to endure pain as a sign of strength. Does that not lead to humans injuring themselves further by ignoring warning signals? Zinthar pressed. Sometimes, yeah. Humans can be stupid about injuries. We'll ignore pain until things get really bad. It's not always a good thing being able to push through. Sometimes pain is your body telling you to stop. The questions continued for over an hour. By the end of it, Jake's throat was sore from talking, but he felt good about the experience. He'd given the students a glimpse into human biology and psychology, and maybe help them understand that humans weren't trying to be tough or scary. They were just being themselves. After the lecture, several students approached Jake with more questions. A medical student wanted to know about human pharmaceutical tolerances. An engineering student asked about human strength relative to body size. A psychology student inquired about human risk-taking behavior. Jake answered as best he could, though he made it clear he was far from an expert on his own species. As the crowd finally dispersed, Professor Kent approached with his characteristic enthusiasm. "That was excellent, Jake. You gave the students a perspective they couldn't get from textbooks or lectures. Personal experience is invaluable in understanding xenobiology." "Happy to help, Professor. It was actually kind of fun once I got over the nerves." "I've been thinking," Professor Kent said, his tendrils coiling in a pattern that suggested deep contemplation. "Your recovery has raised interesting questions about comparative biology. Would you be willing to participate in some non-invasive studies? Nothing painful or dangerous, just some tests to better understand human capabilities." Jake hesitated. He wasn't thrilled about being a lab rat, but he also understood the value of the research. If studying him could help doctors treat human patients better, or help other species understand humans, maybe it was worth it. "What kind of tests are we talking about?" "Endurance testing, healing rate measurements, metabolic studies, that sort of thing. All observational or minimally invasive. No experiments, just documentation of normal human capabilities." "I guess that would be okay, as long as it doesn't interfere with my classes." "Of course, we'll work around your schedule. Thank you, Jake. This research could be groundbreaking." Over the next few months, Jake became a regular visitor to the xenobiology department. He ran on treadmills while researchers measured his oxygen consumption and heart rate, amazed at his endurance. He provided blood samples that showed a complexity of immune factors that most species didn't possess. He demonstrated his throwing accuracy, his ability to track multiple moving objects simultaneously, and his capacity to function in low-light conditions. Every test revealed something new about human capabilities. The research team discovered that humans were persistence hunters, capable of running prey to exhaustion over long distances. They learned that human sweat was an incredibly efficient cooling system, allowing humans to regulate body temperature in ways most species couldn't. They documented human pattern recognition abilities, which were far superior to many supposedly more intelligent species. They measured human reaction times and found them remarkably fast, honed by millions of years of avoiding predators. But perhaps the most interesting discovery was human adaptability. Jake's body adjusted to the Academy's slightly lower gravity within weeks. His circadian rhythm adapted to the station's artificial day-night cycle. Even his diet had shifted to accommodate alien foods, though he still craved Earth cuisine. Humans, it seemed, could adapt to almost anything given enough time. The research was published in multiple journals and generated significant interest across the galactic community. Some species were fascinated by human capabilities. Others were concerned. A few were actively frightened. The idea of a species that healed rapidly, adapted constantly, and refused to give up was unsettling to cultures that valued stability and predictability. Jake found himself at the center of a debate he never wanted to be part of. Some voices in the galactic community argued that humans were dangerous, that their death world origins made them unsuitable for integration into civilized society. Others countered that human resilience could benefit everyone, that their unique capabilities could solve problems other species couldn't address. The debate raged in forums and councils and academic papers, all because Jake had fallen off a building and survived. He tried to ignore the controversy and focus on his studies. Sunspire Academy had accepted him as a student, not as a specimen or a symbol. He had classes to attend, exams to pass, and friendships to maintain. But the attention was hard to escape. Reporters requested interviews. Political groups tried to use him as a symbol for their causes. Some students looked at him with awe, others with suspicion, and a few with fear. "I just want to be a normal student," Jake complained to Lyra one evening as they studied together in the library. "Is that too much to ask?" Lyra's ears drooped sympathetically. "You're not normal, though. None of us are. That's why we're here. Sunspire Academy exists because the galaxy needs beings from different worlds working together. Your abnormality is valuable, Jake, even if it's uncomfortable. I guess it's just weird being famous for something I didn't even do on purpose. I fell. That's not an achievement. That's an accident. But you survived and healed and proved that humans are tougher than anyone realized. That matters to people, Jake. It changes how they think about your species." Jake supposed she was right, but it didn't make the attention any easier to handle. He threw himself into his studies, finding solace in the predictability of mathematics and physics. Quantum mechanics didn't care that he was human. Relativistic equations treated everyone equally. In the classroom, he was just another student struggling to understand the universe's complexities. The semester progressed, and Jake's life slowly returned to something approaching normal. The media attention faded as other stories took precedence. The debate about human integration continued, but without him at the center of it. He made friends, joined study groups, and even tried out for the Academy's zero-gravity sports team, though his human bone density gave him an unfair advantage in collision-based games. Then came the incident with the reactor. It happened during a routine engineering practical in the Academy's training facility. Students were learning about fusion reactor maintenance, working in teams to diagnose and repair simulated problems. Jake's team was working on a particularly tricky coolant flow issue when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "This is not a drill," the facility AI announced calmly. "Containment breach in Reactor 3. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Students began rushing toward the exits in organized panic. The Academy's safety drills had prepared them for this scenario, and most species were heading for the designated safe zones. But Jake noticed something the others hadn't. Through the observation window into Reactor 3, he could see someone still inside the containment area. "Professor Kent!" Jake shouted, pointing at the window. The professor was collapsed on the floor of the reactor chamber. His tendrils spread limply around him. He must have been overcome by the radiation leak before he could evacuate. "Leave him!" shouted one of the facility supervisors, a Grath with thick armor plating. "The radiation levels are already lethal. Anyone who goes in there will die." Jake didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed a radiation suit from the emergency locker, pulling it on as he ran toward the reactor chamber's emergency entrance. Behind him, he heard shouting, people yelling at him to stop, but he was already entering the access code and cycling through the airlock. The radiation suit was designed for species much more vulnerable to radiation than humans. It would buy him some time, but not much. Jake burst into the reactor chamber and immediately felt the heat. The temperature was rising as the coolant failure continued. His suit's sensors screamed warnings about radiation levels that were off the scale. Professor Kent lay near the reactor core, unconscious but breathing. Jake grabbed him, surprised at how light the Vortain was, and began dragging him toward the exit. The professor's tendrils dragged on the floor, and Jake tried to be gentle while also moving as fast as possible. The radiation burned. Even through the suit, Jake could feel it. It was like standing too close to a fire, except the fire was invisible, and it was cooking him from the inside out. His skin prickled, his eyes watered. Every breath felt heavy and hot, but he kept moving, one step at a time, pulling the professor toward safety. The airlock seemed impossibly far away. Jake's muscles screamed in protest. His vision started to blur at the edges, but he could see the door, could see safety just ahead. He dragged Professor Kent through the airlock and slammed the emergency close button. The door sealed with a hiss of pressurizing air. Medical teams were waiting on the other side. They grabbed Professor Kent and rushed him away to treatment. Someone pulled off Jake's helmet, and he gulped in the cool, clean air of the facility corridor. His face was bright red, and he could feel blisters forming on his skin where the radiation had penetrated the suit. "You idiot," Dr. Velas said, appearing at his side with a medical scanner. "Absolute reckless idiot. The radiation exposure you just took would kill most species in minutes." "But not humans?" Jake managed to say through cracked lips. "We'll see," she replied grimly, already injecting him with anti-radiation medication. "Get him to medical, now." Jake spent the next 3 days in isolation while his body dealt with the radiation exposure. He was sick, more sick than he'd ever been in his life. He vomited until there was nothing left to vomit. His skin peeled off in sheets. His hair fell out in clumps. The pain was constant and overwhelming, worse than any injury he'd experienced. But he didn't die. Slowly, agonizingly, his body began to repair the radiation damage. His bone marrow produced new blood cells to replace the ones that had been destroyed. His skin grew back, pink and sensitive but healthy. His immune system, battered but not broken, rallied to fight off opportunistic infections. Professor Kent recovered fully. The Vortain had been exposed to the radiation for less time than Jake, and his species was surprisingly resilient to radiation effects, at least in the short term. He visited Jake every day during his recovery, his tendrils drooping with guilt. "You should not have risked yourself for me," Professor Kent said on his 4th visit. "The radiation could have killed you." "But it didn't," Jake replied. His voice was rough, his throat still raw from vomiting. "And you're alive. That's what matters." "Why did you do it? You had no obligation to risk your life for mine." Jake had thought about that question a lot during his recovery. "Because you needed help. Because I could help. Because that's what humans do. We look out for each other, even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous." Professor Kent's tendrils trembled slightly. "Your species continues to surprise me. Such selflessness from a Deathworld species seems contradictory." "Maybe that's why we're selfless," Jake suggested. "Life on Earth is hard. We learned early that we needed each other to survive. Pack tactics against predators, communities to share resources, tribes to watch each other's backs. Humans who looked out only for themselves didn't make it. The ones who cooperated, who helped each other, they're the ones who passed on their genes. So yeah, we're tough and dangerous, but we're also cooperative and protective. Both traits helped us survive." The professor was silent for a long moment, processing this perspective. "I believe I am beginning to understand why the galactic community has such mixed reactions to humanity. You are simultaneously the most dangerous and the most caring species many of us have encountered." "We contain multitudes," Jake said, quoting an old Earth poem he'd learned in school. "Humans are complicated. We're capable of great violence and great compassion, often at the same time. It's part of what makes us human." News of Jake's rescue spread even faster than the story of his fall had. This time the narrative was different. He wasn't just the indestructible human who survived falling off a building. He was the human who had risked lethal radiation exposure to save his professor. The combination of toughness and selflessness captured the galactic imagination in a way his survival alone hadn't. The debate about human integration shifted. Those who feared humans now had to reconcile that fear with the image of Jake dragging an injured professor to safety. Those who had argued that Deathworld species were too aggressive for civilized society had to explain why a human had risked his life for an alien. The narrative was changing, and Jake found himself accidentally at the center of that change yet again. When he was finally cleared to leave medical isolation, Jake returned to his dormitory to find it transformed. His friends had decorated it with banners and messages of support. Tesh's light patterns were so bright with joy that Jake had to shield his eyes. Lyra's ears stood straight up with excitement. Even Zinthar was there, his crystalline structure flickering with colors that suggested genuine warmth. "You're an idiot," Lyra said, hugging him carefully, mindful of his still healing skin. A brave, wonderful, reckless idiot. Yeah, I get that a lot, Jake replied, returning the hug. But Professor Kent is okay, so it was worth it. The entire academy is talking about you, Zinthar said. You've become something of a legend, the Immortal Deathworlder who cannot be killed, now also the hero who faces radiation without fear. I definitely felt fear, Jake corrected. I was terrified the whole time. But fear doesn't mean you don't act. It just means you're brave enough to act despite the fear. His friends had prepared a small celebration, complete with food from a dozen different worlds. Jake was touched by the gesture, though his stomach was still too sensitive for much eating. They sat together in his dormitory, sharing stories and laughter, and for the first time since the incident, Jake felt truly at ease. The semester ended with Jake passing all his exams, though his grades suffered slightly from the time spent recovering from radiation exposure. Professor Kent made sure that his medical absences were excused and even offered to provide supplementary tutoring if needed. The Academy administration awarded Jake a commendation for bravery, a formal certificate that he stuffed in a drawer and tried to forget about. Summer break arrived and Jake faced a choice. He could return to Earth, see his family, and spend time on his homeworld. Or he could stay at the Academy and continue his research with Professor Kent. The decision was harder than he expected. He missed Earth, missed the familiar gravity and the smell of Earth's air and the taste of real Earth food. But he also felt like his work at Sunspire Academy was important. In the end, he compromised. He would spend half the summer on Earth and half at the Academy. He booked his passage on a transport ship and prepared for the long journey home. Earth looked smaller than he remembered as the transport approached. The blue and green sphere hung in space, clouds swirling across its surface. But it also looked beautiful, vibrant with life. From space, you couldn't see the dangers, the predators, the disasters. You could only see the beauty. His family met him at the spaceport. His mother cried. His father crushed him in a bear hug. His younger sister demanded to know if he'd really survived lethal radiation. The attention was overwhelming but also comforting. These were his people, his species, and being among them felt like coming home. They wanted to hear everything. Jake told them about falling from the observation deck, about healing in 3 days, about the reactor incident and the radiation exposure. His mother looked horrified. His father looked proud. His sister looked envious, though she tried to hide it. "You're famous," his sister told him over dinner that first night. "There are videos of you all over the net. Some people are calling you a hero. Others are saying you're proof that humans are too dangerous for space." "I'm just a student," Jake protested. "I'm not trying to be famous or dangerous. I'm just trying to get my degree." "Too late," his father said with a slight smile. "You're a symbol now, whether you want to be or not. The question is what you do with that." Jake hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on surviving, on healing, on getting through each day that he hadn't considered the bigger picture. But his father was right. He'd become a symbol of human resilience, of human heroism, of everything that made humanity both admirable and frightening to the rest of the galaxy. The next few weeks on Earth were a mixture of relaxation and reflection. Jake reconnected with old friends, most of whom were amazed by his off-world adventures. He hiked in the mountains near his home, reacclimating to Earth's heavier gravity. He ate Earth food until he thought he might burst, and he thought about what it meant to be human, to be a representative of his species in a galaxy that was still trying to figure out what to make of humanity. Humans were tough. That was undeniable. They healed fast, endured pain, survived radiation, and kept going when other species would give up. But they were also kind. They helped each other. They risked themselves for others. They built communities and friendships and bonds that transcended species differences. Maybe that combination was what made them special. Not the toughness alone, but the toughness paired with compassion. When Jake returned to Sunspire Academy for the second half of summer break, he felt different, more centered, more aware of his role not just as a student, but as a bridge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Professor Kent noticed the change immediately. "Earth was good for you," the professor observed as they resumed their research. "You seem more at peace with yourself." "I think I am," Jake agreed. "I've been fighting against being seen as special or different. But the truth is, I am different. All humans are. We come from a world that forged us into something unique. That's not good or bad, it just is." "A wise perspective," Professor Kent said, "and one that I hope others will come to share. The galaxy needs humans, Jake. Your resilience, your compassion, your refusal to give up. These are valuable traits. The challenge is helping others see that." They worked together throughout the summer, documenting human capabilities and exploring the biological mechanisms that made humans so resilient. The research revealed fascinating details about human evolution, the redundant systems that provided backup if primary organs failed, the aggressive immune response that could adapt to new threats within days, the pain management systems that allowed humans to function through injuries that would incapacitate other species, the healing processes that operated at speeds that seemed impossible to species from gentler worlds. But the research also revealed human vulnerabilities. Humans were susceptible to certain toxins that other species could safely consume. Their reliance on specific nutrients meant that dietary restrictions could cause serious health problems. Their psychological makeup made them vulnerable to stress and trauma in ways that more stoic species weren't. And despite their resilience, humans could be killed. They were tough, not invincible. Professor Kent published a comprehensive paper titled Human Resilience, an Evolutionary Perspective on Deathworld Adaptation. The paper became required reading in xenobiology courses across the galaxy. It presented humans not as dangerous anomalies or indestructible warriors, but as a species shaped by their environment, with strengths and weaknesses like any other species. The balanced perspective helps shift the galactic conversation about humanity. When the new semester began, Jake noticed the change immediately. Students no longer stared at him with fear or awe. They treated him like any other student, albeit one with interesting biology. The whispers and pointing had largely stopped. He was no longer the Immortal Deathworlder who could not be killed. He was just Jake, a human student studying physics at Sunspire Academy. His course load was heavy that semester. Advanced quantum field theory, relativistic astrophysics, and a seminar on wormhole mechanics. But Jake threw himself into the work with enthusiasm. This was why he'd come to Sunspire Academy, not to be a curiosity or a symbol, but to learn. Lyra remained one of his closest friends. Her Fennec's perspective on the universe was so different from his human one that their study sessions often devolved into philosophical discussions about the nature of reality. Zinthar had softened considerably since their first confrontation, and the two of them now collaborated on research projects. Tesh communicated primarily through light patterns, which Jake had learned to read with reasonable accuracy, and their conversations about mathematics were conducted in a mixture of verbal language and luminous equations. Jake's life had found a rhythm. Classes in the morning, research in the afternoon, study groups in the evening. He played zero-gravity handball on weekends, though the referees had implemented special rules to account for his human bone density. He attended lectures by visiting professors from across the galaxy. He even started dating a Yimmel student named Kira, who found human biology fascinating and Jake's personality charming. The incident with the observation deck and the reactor became stories he told at parties, anecdotes that illustrated human resilience without defining him. He was more than his ability to heal. He was a student, a friend, a researcher, a person. His humanity was part of him, but it wasn't all of him. One evening, as he sat in the Academy's observation lounge, watching the stars, Lyra joined him. Her ears were relaxed, her posture comfortable. They sat in companionable silence for a while, just watching the universe spin by. "Do you ever regret coming here?" Lyra asked eventually. To Sunspire? To space? Jake considered the question. He'd been hurt here, had been sick, had been scrutinized and studied and turned into a symbol. But he'd also learned so much, grown so much, made friends he never would have met on Earth. No, he said finally. No regrets, this is where I'm supposed to be. Even with all the attention, the controversy, the debate about whether humans belong in space? Especially because of that, Jake replied. Someone has to show the galaxy who humans really are. Not just the tough parts, but the caring parts too. The curious parts. The parts that want to learn and grow and connect with others. If I can help with that, even a little, then the attention is worth it. Lyra's ears twitched in a way that Jake had learned meant she was pleased. You've changed since you first arrived. You're more confident, more comfortable with yourself. I've learned a lot, not just about physics and math, but about what it means to be human in a galaxy full of non-humans. About representing your species while still being yourself. About being tough without being hard. They sat together and watched the stars, two students from different worlds, friends despite their differences. The galaxy was vast and strange and full of diversity. Humans were just one species among thousands, remarkable in their own way, but not more important or valuable than others. They had their strengths and their weaknesses, their gifts and their limitations. But they were here. They were part of the galactic community now, for better or worse. And students like Jake, living and studying among aliens, were the bridge that would help both humans and non-humans understand each other. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but one he'd accepted. The Immortal Deathworlder, who could not be killed, was just a story, an exaggeration born from a single incident. The reality was more complex and more interesting. Jake Torres was a human, with all the resilience and compassion and stubbornness that implied. He was a student, learning to navigate both the universe's physical laws and its social complexities. He was a friend, building connections across species boundaries. And he was a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not, of humanity's place in the larger galaxy. As the stars wheeled overhead and the Academy hummed with the life of 1,000 species, Jake felt at peace. He'd found his place in the universe, not despite his humanity, but because of it. The galaxy needed humans, with all their contradictions and complications, and humans needed the galaxy to challenge them and teach them and help them grow beyond the confines of their Deathworld origins. The observation lounge's lights began to dim, signaling the station's artificial night cycle. Lyra stood and stretched, her movements graceful and fluid. Coming? We have that astrophysics exam in the morning. Jake stood as well, his movements still heavy with Earth's gravity imprinted in his bones. Yeah, let's go. I need to review the equations for gravitational lensing one more time. They walked together through the Academy's corridors, past classrooms and laboratories and dormitories housing species from across the known galaxy. Sunspire Academy was more than just a school. It was a promise, a vision of a future where species differences were celebrated rather than feared, where a human could fall 40 meters and survive, and it would be seen not as threatening, but as amazing. Jake had survived his fall. He'd survived radiation exposure. He'd survived being thrust into the spotlight as a representative of his species. But more than just surviving, he'd grown. He'd learned. He'd become part of something larger than himself. The Immortal Deathworlder who could not be killed was a myth, an oversimplification. But the human student who kept trying, who kept learning, who kept reaching out to connect with others despite the risks, that was real. That was Jake Torres, and that perhaps was the most human thing of all. As he entered his dormitory and prepared for another day of classes and research and the beautiful complexity of life in space, Jake smiled. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Not because he couldn't be killed, but because he chose to live fully, to embrace both the dangers and the joys of existence. The galaxy was vast and strange, and sometimes frightening, but it was also wonderful, full of possibilities and friendships and discoveries waiting to be made. And Jake, human student at Sunspire Academy, was ready for all of it. Falls and radiation and controversy and all. Because that was what humans did. They survived, they adapted, and they kept moving forward, always reaching for the stars.